right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Difficult Conversations by Supply the Y. I can't tell you how much I've missed being back here behind the mic and interacting with all of you. And tonight's the night. We got a great show for you. So today we're going to be focusing on active shooter events. And we have three subject matter experts as far as different pieces of response to active shooters. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to bring up one of our frequent flyers on the show. Everybody knows Mike Powell. Mike, how's it going?
Awesome. Good to be back, Dean. I'm glad to see that we got another live showing. I've missed it.
All right. Well, as always, we're happy to have you back. You're a great contributor to the show, and I'm sure tonight's not going to be any different. So our next guest is somebody who is a good friend of mine. He's somebody that I've worked with and somebody that I turn to for advice, especially when I need to be told if I am full of crap or not, because this person does not hold back. So let's go ahead and let's bring up John Bonney.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this, Dean. I know you and I go back a long time. The other guy you haven't introduced yet, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing his take on things. And Mike, I've grown an incredible admiration for you through this program that Dean has, and I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight.
All right. Welcome, John. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Paul Tim. Paul, what's happening?
Well, I'm really glad to be here. I feel like the stranger because I'm the only one who has an accent, but it's nice to be with all of you guys. It's actually an honor. So thank you, Dean.
All right. Well, Paul, since you have the talking stick, why don't you jump right in and talk a little bit about what your background is and why you're somebody that needs to be at the table for these conversations.
Yeah, thank you. I grew up at Argonne National Labs, which is a Department of Energy facility in the Chicago area. And actually, my home today is not 10 or 15 minutes outside of Argonne. And my dad was given the project to be the site security upgrade project manager back in the early 80s and did such a great job that the federal government asked him to start his own consulting business so he could help out all the DOE facilities nationwide, which he did until he passed in 2007. But when I joined in the late 90s, I started focusing on schools, and there really wasn't much to focus on. And then in 99 is when the Columbine incident happened. And immediately following that incident, I was asked to speak in tandem with the Chief Deputy District Attorney of Jefferson County, Colorado, who prosecuted it. And since then, I've really focused on schools.
All right. Well, we're certainly going to circle back to that. John, since this is your first time, talk a little bit about your background and some of the unique experiences that you have that makes you a perfect person for this conversation.
All right. Hit me with it hard right off the bat. So I got almost 20 years in law enforcement. I am a lieutenant in the town of Stoughton. I spent a year as a school resource officer from 07 to 08. I am more of a full-time dad, I think. So I get kids. My son just graduated high school, but I have a daughter who's a freshman in the town I work in. And my wife is also a teacher in one of the elementary schools town I work in. So this particular topic is personally and professionally close to my heart here.
All right. So it's a well-rounded panel, as you can see. So we're going to jump right into the fire here. So, gentlemen, there's a lot of talk about what needs to happen, we need more of, what we need less of in order to, I guess prevent is a bad word, but maybe lessen the frequency of these events. So I'm going to jump to Mike first. Mike, talk a little bit about your points of view as well as what we can do or where we should be looking to try to minimize these active shooter type events.
It's actually a great question, Dean, and just like a lot of other folks, I wish I had the answer to that. But I think what I can bring is a common sense answer and a common sense approach, and I think that is just getting people to realize that it's not just a law enforcement responsibility; it's a responsibility of the schools, of everyone involved in the schools. And I think that point needs to be made. Obviously, law enforcement plays a part in trying to minimize the loss of life. However, that also we also have to look at the responsibilities of the folks that are in the school as far as security features and protocols that are in place when something like when active shooter incidents do occur, or just not just active shooter incidents, but anytime a school goes into lockdown mode for whatever reason. So I think it really has to be looked at from a common sense approach, and we've done a lot of things to kind of harden a lot of the schools as far as security features are concerned. But we can do things a lot better, and I think that it's looking at access and exit points from schools and making sure that, possibly equipping them with alarms and things that would trigger a response from school officials looking at those features.
All right. So I see Paul nodding his head emphatically there. Paul, can you add to that?
Yeah, listen, there's not been a school violence incident of significant proportion that has not involved a failure of access control. And so, we all, as we're reading news stories and getting media reports, know that this guy walked right into a school building, no delay, no secured vestibule, or he came in through a side or a back door.
And you're referring to Uvalde? Are you referring to Uvalde right now?
I am referring to Uvalde. Thank you for that. And then classrooms also unlocked and open, and people push against that and say, well, my gosh, that's the way it was when I went to school, or everybody knows everybody, but I like to harken back to the 70s, Dean, when you could buy a car that didn't have a seatbelt, and a whole family of 5 could sit in the front seat together, or mom could have an infant in her lap and while driving. And we look back on that now and we go, that was nuts. How did we ever allow that to happen? Because once we went to seatbelts and car seats and all of those, or should I call it a car seat? Anyway,
okay.
Regardless,
That kind of hurt.
I mean, we look back and same thing with schools now. We're going to look back and say every classroom should be closed and locked while we're teaching. And 10 years from now, we'll look back and say, how did we ever do it with classrooms just wide open so anybody could walk in at any time? It doesn't make sense.
All right. So, John, perfect time for you to jump in here. I'm going to let you in. John and I used to have a lot of conversations about basically everything. And a lot of what we talked about is old versus new, and that transition piece that needs to take place in order to move on to the next step. So, John, can you just jump in? What are your feelings on some of the transitions that need to happen to take us from some of the old school ways of doing things and bring us into what needs to be a new school mode of thinking?
It's really difficult because honestly, a lot of things come down to funding, because nothing's cheap. You know what I mean? And Paul, I don't know if it's like this in other parts of the country, but everything has to go out to bid. Everything is competition for pricing, for doors, for access control panels and everything. So we can come up with all these recommendations. The school can say, hey, I love it. These recommendations are incredible. And then it's got to go before a school committee or a town meeting. And it's just, there is a sort of a lot of red tape involved in progress, and that hurts. One of the things I can say positively is the meshing together of training between police departments and schools have gotten a little bit better. And frankly, it's tough on the teachers who really went to school to teach children, and they didn't go to school to run, hide, fight. They didn't go to school to respond to an active shooter. But things are born out of necessity, and the training that's been combined with the schools and the police departments have really improved. But we can't just stop because we did it once or twice.
All right. I'm going to rebound back to Paul. Then Mike, I see you. I know you want to jump in too. Paul, do you have a reaction to that?
Well, sure. Listen, nobody wants to do anything that involves security. We always teach the first law of loss prevention, and it says effective loss prevention, which we all want, is always preceded by extensive losses, which means your neighbor doesn't get a burglar alarm system until after their house is burglarized. Or let's go global, we don't get a Department of Homeland Security until after 9/11. And the issue is we should be thinking about safety. And I'll leave one story before I head it back to you. But I was working with a county in West Virginia that was so rural, there wasn't a single stoplight in the county. And a principal told me that she didn't even have a lock on her front door. They would leave their keys in their car. and in their driveway until she came home one day years ago, and there was somebody on meth in her house robbing her. And she walked in, and it wasn't so much the theft; it was that this person was on drugs. And she said since then she always has had a deadbolt on her front door. We don't want to have to learn it that way. We want to know that there are basic safety and security. And I don't mean a moat with alligators in it, but I mean keeping the barn door closed.
All right. So, Mike, training component, talk a little bit about that, because I saw you nodding emphatically when John was talking about that.
No, I think John brought up a great point. And, and again, it's the responsibility of all of us in the community. And we're fortunate in Malden that we have our SOU commander. He does a fantastic job with continuing to conduct training with different schools, school environments. But there can always be more that can be done. And John brings up a great point with funding. Everyone, we want a better product, but no one wants to pay for it. And I think that's unfortunate when we think about young folks and security and keeping our young people safe. So if you want it, we have to pay for it. And I hope that folks realize that young people and young lives, it's worth the money. And Paul brings up an excellent point also. Keep the bond door closed. Society changes. And as society changes, so does everything else that comes with that, with evil intentions and folks that want to harm other folks, whether it's substance abuse or mental health, or whatever the case may be. Society's constantly changing, and we have to keep up with it. And part of that is reaching out to folks like Paul, and him assisting us in keeping our young people safe.
All right. So I had a question in mind, but Mike, you had to go and throw gasoline on the flame. So now I got to go back to John on this one. You talked about the mental health piece. All right. Is it possible to keep the barn door closed when the game is constantly evolving and changing? And the mental health piece is something that, Paul, I'm sure you know a lot of police officers with your line of work, but I know that Mike and John have talked we've talked a bunch about this. Trying to contain them and get our hands around the mental health piece is very difficult because we're not psychologists, and B, it just doesn't seem like prevention is something that's high on a lot of people's list when you're managing a budget, because it's not something that's tangible, right? Every problem you prevent is something that you never knew happened. So how do you measure it? Yeah. So John, if you want to talk to some of those points, please do.
Unearth some things. I have to imagine that, like when Paul's presenting sort of the security analysis, like you have to be startling educators, because like kids don't want to be in a prison. Kids want to be in a fun, healthy environment, and that's what's going to keep them safe and happy. And there's like a fine line of like, how much do we lock these schools down just for day to day? You know what I mean? To keep it safe. And obviously the answer for doors, every door should be locked and shut all the time. But with every new school shooting comes a new worry for us adults and for the kids. And if they're coming into school every day and not feeling safe because things are so secure and seeing police officers all around all the time, I don't know. I don't know where to draw the line.
Is it feasible to lock the doors all day long? So, Paul, you mentioned that piece earlier about locking the doors. Every classroom should be locked when it's in session. Talk a little bit about the thought process that went into that.
Well, listen, first of all, I understand it's operationally inconvenient, but at a certain point, we're going to stop trading security for convenience. You see people prop open doors, whether it was back in the day for a smoke or to run to their car or whatever it might be. There's just... And if we did spend money on electronic access, we've just rendered that valueless when we propped open a door or allowed somebody to tailgate in behind us. It really takes education. And even in my own home with my own kids, I'm an empty nester now, but I didn't restrict my kids so they couldn't do anything. I just had a conversation to say, hey, when you're on Instagram, you're not going to go public because it'd be like letting kids follow you around on the campus at college. You're not going to do that. That would be weird. It'd be creeping on you. So you're gonna stay private. I know you won't get as many likes, but so in all phases of life, we just have to be thinking a little bit more. And the other thing I wanted to say, Dean, is this: I also don't have mental health expertise, but I do know that a threat assessment team is going to have members that do have mental health expertise. And we can look at those transient threats that come in and decide whether or not they're substantive and how we can make interventions in people's lives.
Well put. So let me just take a quick break here. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is Difficult Conversations by Supply the Y. I'm here with Paul Tim, Mike Powell, and John Bonney. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat. If you feel that this conversation is worthwhile and you're enjoying the content, please like, share, and subscribe. So while we're talking about the comments, Diane has a comment she'd like to for us to discuss. She says CPTED isn't new, and CPTED is what's that? That's something.
Crime prevention through environmental design.
Environmental design. All right, crime prevention by environmental design. It isn't new, but it's often left by the wayside due to the initial cost or maintenance cost. How do we get buy-in from cities, towns, and campuses? Mike.
Easy.
Take off your cop hat, put on your salesman hat. Sell this.
It's easy. Continue to remind them about Uvalde. It's easy. It's simple. And again, it's just that simple. It really is, Dean. Keep reminding folks about Uvalde. If we want to see this to become continue to repeat itself, then this is what we're going to be dealing with. Unless you want to listen to folks like Paul, it really is as simple as that. And if you again, I'm going to repeat myself, because if you value young people and young lives, you shouldn't put a price tag on that, because not only, and I think John alluded to this, but look at the potential, look at the destruction it's doing to the people in the schools. It's affecting their mental health as well, and that can be traumatic as they grow into adulthood. So again, keep reminding folks about Uvalde.
All right, perfectly said. John, jump in on this. And again, let's circle back to your very unique experience as a school resource officer and somebody you're married to, somebody who's an educator in schools.
Yeah. So one of the toughest classes I've ever been to was a class around this topic, and it was taught by a guy from the Connecticut State Police who responded to Sandy Hook, and talked about how one of the responders' daughter was in that classroom, and they're going door to door, clearing the room, and he sees his daughter inside the classroom, and she's safe.
Hey, everybody.
But when he tries to continue on with the mission, comes in the hallway, and he very much struggled with continuing the mission, because I don't know, and it wasn't that just, so this is like a game of telephone. It wasn't the gentleman who was involved in this that was telling the story. He was relaying it. But he very much struggled with the continuing the mission. And I think in these smaller communities where, you have kids who or officers with kids in the schools or spouses in the schools, that is, it sends you to a different level. And, Dean, you and I were talking earlier today, we've responded to how many critical incidents in our careers. But if something happens with your own family, is your response different? You know what I mean? And so when we get something at the high school, if there's something minor at the high school, my senses are a little bit tighter, and I don't know. It's a tough thing for police officers who have families in the schools, because it's just, I mean, every child is precious, but when it's your child in that school, you feel a little different.
100%. You become more human than you are cop. And a lot of people that don't do what we do don't understand that that's still a possibility. At the end of the day, there's still a person behind these badges and underneath these hats.
I think
we're just like anybody else. Go ahead, continue, John.
I think too, part of the biggest struggle is people, and it's just human nature, will fail to look at their own failures. You know what I mean? And you can't have improvement until you can be critical of yourself and your own responses. In our line of work, after a major incident, we'll do, debriefs and things like that. But like, I think we should take and Paul, I would imagine there is some sort of catalog that gets sent out or available to schools and police departments after action reports. Like, we should be breaking those things down and saying, okay, if this happened in our community, how would we have responded? And replace, the school in Uvalde for, Stoughton, if I could say, another elementary school, and how would we access that? And I don't know. We're always on to the next thing, and sometimes self-reflection doesn't have enough priority.
Well said, John. Paul, perfect time for you to jump in, because I know that you've been privy to some of these after action reports. And folks, if you're not in law enforcement security, an after action report is exactly what it sounds like. It's after some sort of action has taken place. There is a report that is generated, and it talks about what went right, what went wrong, what we could have done better, so forth and so on. So that's what an after action report is. So Paul, talk about some of your experiences being involved in that process.
Yeah, and to be clear, the Uvalde after action report will not be available for another 6 to 9 months. There's just so much that has to be sifted through. But I will tell you a commonality between the Marjory Stoneman Douglas high school tragedy and the Sandy Hook elementary school tragedy was both findings said that the bad guy had never breached a locked classroom door. And I think it's, again, worth hearing over and over again. We don't need to buy secondary devices to add to that door. They can introduce more risks than they address. The commercial lock that is on the standard classroom door is going to be enough. It's just whether or not we're going to lock it and keep it locked. And I understand that that can inconvenience us from an operational standpoint, but we have to do that. The only other thing, Dean, I want to say is after action reports, after the Columbine High School incident, when they summoned the SWAT team and everybody waited and we watched on TV saying, go in, then everybody moved to rapid deployment. And even now, we're teaching firefighters to come in with those first law enforcement responders so that they can get to help save people as fast as possible. So they're even being trained now, which I think is good. But, we all look at a situation, again, Uvalde's not been written yet, but we look at a situation when there's not been rapid deployment and we wonder how that could possibly be. And you talk with anybody in law enforcement and they say, my gosh, I could never allow that to happen. So that's one of the things they're going to have to dissect here. How could they not have had the keys or the two-way radio for communication or whatever it might have been? And we learn all of those things to John and Mike's points. We learn those through drills, practice drills.
Perfect segue for our next question. Really quick, if you are watching on LinkedIn, we do not get your comments here. So if you have the ability, please jump on our Supply the Y Facebook page or our Supply the Y YouTube page, and then we can see your questions if you have anything you want to throw in the chat. So Heidi wants to know what type of training is available and or mandatory for schools. So let's go back to Mike on that one. What have you seen schools training and what's mandatory in your community, if anything?
Yeah, I don't know that I would call it mandatory, but I know that the schools, like our SOU commander.
SOU means what exactly?
Special Operations Unit.
Okay.
So SWAT team, tactical team. We got different names for them, but so our SWAT commander, he goes around and links up with the different school administrators and incorporates some security features or points out some security features that can be done better and different drills in the event that the school does go in lockdown. Some of the things that they can do in order to keep the staff and students a little safer. So I don't think that it's mandatory, but I know that our department does a fantastic job with continuing. We could always do more, but we do a great job with continuing to integrate these schools, as well as Paul pointed out, the EMTs and firefighters.
All right. So I have personal knowledge of what Stoughton does, but John's going to tell it better than I could. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, we've been developing more and more training as the years have gone on. And, we have 2 SROs right now, but we have a sort of a long history of SROs that have taught Alice, which is some form of run, hide, fight. In all of the schools, we did a multi-agency response with the fire department, like was mentioned earlier, which was extremely valuable. Setting up, warm zones and clearing the threat, but bringing firefighters in with us. The more we can do of that, the better. I'd love to see at some point us, and I think that was going down that road, but then that nasty word COVID crept up. But I do see us doing sort of this, even a multi-agency response, but including the schools in it. But it's really, really evolved, and it's awesome to see the way the teachers have really taken to this. And, I've been sort of a fly on the wall inside the classroom, or I've taken part of it, but being inside the classroom and seeing how creative the teachers can get for, not just locking the door, but barricading the door and tying belts on and, and then attacking the attacker and stuff like that. Like they've really, or some teachers have done an excellent job of actually saying, we're moving my classroom. If over the loudspeaker, there's some activity about where the threat is and they can move out. It's really been unbelievable to watch non-law enforcement professionals really put everything they can into learning this when it's not their field.
So, Paul, I'm going to have you jump in on this, but I want to also throw a little, add a little extra for you in there. How important is it, keeping in mind everything John and Mike have said, how important is it to give people permission and to make people just really give them the freedom to make choices and kind of figure out on their own how they go about the run, hide, fight components?
Well, it's really important. And, I can't tell you how many teachers say, just tell me what to do. Am I supposed to lock down, or am I supposed to just tell me what to do? And I say, well, the situation dictates what you should do. You're going to need to assess the situation, and you are empowered, that's an Alice word, to then make a decision. And I have a sort of a good example for this. I ran into a school that was trying what they called the stop and think drill. And that's because they never could do a lockdown drill during arrival time, dismissal time, or lunchtime. It was too disruptive. But they could make an announcement over the PA during those tough times and say, your attention, please. We are now going to have our stop and think drill. If an incident were happening right now, what would your options be? And then somebody who's just walking into the building can take a look. Would I head back to my car? Would I go in the building? If I go in the building, where am I going to go? If I'm in the cafeteria and nowhere close to my classroom, will I go into the kitchen or out the door? And it gives people situational awareness, which, by the way, transcends this whole school discussion. It then applies to the grocery store and the movie theater and the church, and being aware of our surroundings, not because we're afraid, but because we want to have a game plan.
So, Paul, that you stole my thunder a little bit there, because I was going to go next. Being difficult conversations and all, I was going to try to throw a roadblock in there. Can you take these principles that typically are taught in schools, and can you apply them to other organizations and buildings?
You can. And I know one thing about all three of you, even though we don't know each other well, when you sit down at a chair in a restaurant, at the table in the restaurant, you're facing the door to see who's coming in. You never have your back to the door because you understand situational awareness. And we can do that when we're driving and drive in the lane that has a shoulder on it, and not get in the war with the guy who's been cutting people off. And I mean, it's just having some defensive driver mentality.
All right. Well said. So Charlie says, I know in the past, some schools have been resistant to Alice due to the counter or combat part. How have you all overcome this or sell this so the program can be fully implemented? John, I know you want to go ahead, my man.
So it was not a super smooth transition. Like I said, at the beginning of it, when we started doing it, a lot of the teachers were saying, hey, this is not part of our curriculum. But once we got rolling and we showed them really how effective it can be, there was a lot of buy-in, and it came pretty quickly.
All right. Mike, what say you?
Yeah, no, I'd like to piggyback off what John said, but I think if your schools are, or the school administrators are having a difficult time trying to digest it, I think you start small. You start with the staff, and let the staff kind of have a trickle off effect to the students. So if you don't think that the students are going to be receptive, no problem. Start small and work big. And I think a big piece to that is making sure that everybody is speaking the same language in regards to what should be done if you encounter a lockdown situation or an active shooter. And I think if you start small, I think you're still off on a good path to win.
You bring up a good point, and I sort of forgot to mention, because we've been doing this for so long, that I think it's sort of this grand scale, but that is in fact how it started. I mean, even some of our school administrators went through the ALICE training with our officers and became trainers themselves. So it has to be a marriage. It can't be the police department saying, you got to do this because we said so, and because that just doesn't work. So you're absolutely right, Mike. You got to start small and grow.
I love that part, and thank you, John, for jumping in, because I was going to have Mike put a little more meat on the bones about what it means to start small and grow big. So Jim, excuse me. So Tim, instead of Jim, Paul, jump in a little bit and talk about your experiences starting small and going big.
Yeah, I want to say this. First of all, thank you, all three of you, for your service. I really greatly appreciate it. I want to also mention that the typical civilian is not as tactically minded as you three. And so I love the fact that you're saying start small, and we have to, it's always education. And we're trying to get people to come along with us, because here's the thing, and I always say this, we want to move from the Mayberry mentality. And for those of you that are so young here that you have no idea what I'm talking about, Mayberry was the fictional town in the Andy Griffith Show that never had any problems. Nobody lives there. We move from the Mayberry mentality to much more of a see something, say something mentality, but it takes people a little bit of time to move through that arena. And what it takes is education, so that they can ultimately make a personal investment. Because if we don't get a personal investment, then we've got a culture that is helping the bad guy. We've got a culture that is advertising that we prop open doors, a culture that is demonstrating routine that is easy to interrupt or take advantage of. So we're constantly trying to say, and I don't do this generally by scaring people, but I do this by saying, let's move a little bit further down the road together. And again, there's lots of ways to do that, but you guys hit the nail on the head.
All right. So let me direct a question to John specifically. So John, do you find, and again, outside of your partner, but do you find that it is difficult to have these conversations with educators and instructors about this kind of stuff? Do you find that you get kind of like the ostrich response, where they want to stick their head in the sand and just pretend like nothing's going on? Or do you get a lot of people that are receptive that want to be partners with this?
I have to say, and it depends on the time of year. You know what I mean? If we've had some time and distance between one of these horrific shootings, then complacency sets in. You know what I mean? So, people might have a false sense of security of maybe things are getting better. But, over the last couple of weeks, I have had a number of conversations with teachers, frankly, kind of pissed off about the response or lack of response of people going in and taking action in Uvalde. And frankly, it's tough to defend. I mean, listen, we got to go in. We might not come out, but we got to go in. And if that didn't happen in Texas, I have to say shame on them. And that's tough for us to defend, even all the way up here. I know the after action is going to take months, but the timeline put out by one of the chiefs talking about how there were rounds being fired inside the school while the police officers were just sort of hanging. That's atrocious. And that's tough to defend when teachers are asking me, hey, could that happen here? You know what I mean? I try and comfort people by saying we respond with just overwhelming violence. And like, that's a harsh thing to hear, but that's what would happen.
So it's a great point you bring up there. And to your point, again, I'm privy to some of the same conversations, and I got to be honest, I don't try to defend it. It's not. It's typically I say, listen, I don't work there. That's 1,500 miles away from where I work. It's different than how we train. And Mike, I wanted to get your opinion on when people say things like, well, they need to change their policy. Is changing the policy enough, or do you have to train to the policy? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, listen, if you don't use it, you lose it. And we everyone's always talking about policy, and you can have 30,000 policies in your desk, but that doesn't mean much. What does mean much is that you are actually training around your policy. And again, the policy is going to sit up there and collect dust. But I think to continue to train around your policy and whatever that may be, because I think a lot of police departments have gotten away from sit and wait for 4 members and then go in. I think there are some police departments that still adhere to that philosophy, but for the vast majority of police departments, we've gotten away from that. We've gotten away from, hey, let's wait for a team to go in and then we'll handle business. However, you have to keep in mind that there are some police departments that legitimately adhere to that philosophy. And that's on them to whether they want to change that or not. But whatever your policy is, you have to be prepared to train around that. And it's about consistently training. Because like I said, I've spent 10 years on the tactical team. And I haven't, I've been retired for a few years now. So sometimes when I catch up with some of my tactical buddies and they start speaking their language, I'm lost because I've lost some of that stuff. So I think it's important that not only do you have to talk about it, but you have to actually put it into action. And I think that's important.
All right, Paul, jump on in.
Yeah, I'd love to share this story. I have a colleague who is also a former school resource officer and police officer and security director. And one time we were doing a security assessment at a school, and we arrived in the winter time. It was still dark outside, so maybe we're 6:30 or 7 in the morning at a school in the parking lot. The snowflakes are falling, and we're just kind of watching arrival to make sure that we can find any vulnerabilities and can people just sneak in the building. And we see a guy park in the next row over, and he gets out of the car and he gets something from his trunk. And when he closes it, the wind blows and you can see his sidearm on his hip. But he's dressed like you and me right now with a winter coat on. And Randy goes, "Oh, a gun." And so I was driving. 2 things happened. I thought, well, I'm going to put it in drive and get out of there and call 911. And Randy goes, "Let's go get him." and there is a difference in mentality there. I'm thinking, let's call for, and Randy, as a former police officer, was like, no, we got to go do something now. Turned out it was an off-duty police officer who was going to the building to help, and we didn't tackle him or anything. But I just love that because it is a difference in mentality. And that's why I'm thanking all of you who are ready to do something like that. And what we don't want is now teachers chasing the bad guy like that, or teachers carrying firearms. I don't want that either, but I do want them ready to call, having the communication devices, the panic buttons, whatever it is. And of course, we all expect that law enforcement is going to do exactly what he said and what all of you are saying, that you guys will intercept the adversary.
I got to be honest. I didn't know that people didn't just go in as soon as you got there. I thought that went away years ago. Yeah. Personally, I'm shocked that there's still departments out there that still have that as the way they do business. But again, I never claimed to know it all, but that was mind-boggling to me. John, did you have something? Look like you.
No, I agreed with you. I thought that was done. I mean, we certainly learned a harsh lesson watching things in Columbine, and I don't even remember how many years ago that was. It just seems so far away, and training just has gotten so much better. And I just, I was surprised, very, very surprised to read the timeline.
All right, so let me hit the chat real quick. So Pat has jumped in, and he says, to Mike's point on policy, usually do steer towards the not waiting part, but say the first guy doesn't wait and now he gets incapacitated. So he's saying, suppose the first guy doesn't wait, he goes in and gets incapacitated. There is now another weapon for the shooter to use. I would think it would be smart to at least wait for a second backup. Granted, some towns don't have that luxury. Just curious on what your thoughts were. So, Mike, since it was kind of directed at you, what are your thoughts on waiting for at least a second person, a battle buddy, so to speak, to go in with?
Well, it's easy for me to say my thoughts on it because, I work in a city like Malden where matter of seconds, you're going to have somebody there with you to your right or left. So it's tough for me to give my opinion on this because you go to a smaller community where you're literally the first one in, and you may not have somebody show up for another 5 or 10 minutes or longer. So so the philosophy of going in first is this. Unfortunately, again, this is what we signed up for, and this is what we have to do. We have to be prepared to do as law enforcement. Is you have to be prepared to go in alone. But what that says, that doesn't mean you have to leave your tactics behind when you go in, but you're going to have to go in alone. And if you do, you have, and again, this goes back towards training. So the philosophy behind that, without getting into a whole story, is your job as the first person that goes in there is to at least reduce the loss of life, meaning go towards that threat, distract the threat to the best of your ability until your teammates get there. So that's the philosophy behind it. But again, it's easy for me to say because I come from a community where matter of seconds, I'm going to have somebody to my right and left. But I think for the majority of police departments around the country, you're going to have to be prepared to go in alone, unfortunately.
John?
Yeah, our community isn't as large as Malden's, but we would certainly have just a rapid deployment. And frankly, Paul, you bring up a concern for me as an incident commander. It's one of the things that I hate about plainclothes officers in a hot zone, like especially in a mutual aid situation where, we have a courthouse around the corner. People coming in I think our communities, the people on this panel anyway, our response would be so robust that we would have to set up an incident command very, very quickly to try and, keep people in check a little bit.
Yeah, to keep from almost like an over deployment type situation. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, because things can spiral out of control that way too. But again, in comparison to what is being talked about in Uvalde, that would be one of those good problems if something like that happened. All right, that's an exact opposite. Paul, any final thoughts on this topic?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's going to be people listening who aren't sure what the incident command system even is. And I just want to say this as part of the National Incident Management System, but our company is mostly engineers. On my side of the house, there's a few of us that do the school security, but everybody else is like doing condition assessments. They're engineers. And when the pandemic hit and we couldn't go into places to help anymore, I said, this is the perfect time for everybody to get certified in the basic 100 level course, which you can take for free online. And all 30 people in our company, engineers or security people, got certified in that. And I believe there will be a day where all administrators will be required to be certified in that as well.
So here's my thought on the incident management system. This is something that is near and dear to my heart. I got my master's in emergency management. And this is the Dean Jenkins thought on it. Emergency management, first of all, the fire department does a much better job than the blue team does with implementing incident management. But I will
ask secrets, please.
Hey, sometimes you got to give them props. They do some things better than us. Cook and sleep on duty are two of those things. But what I will say from there is this. I feel that incident command tends to work better when you're dealing with problems that don't have personalities. So when you are dealing with things like, for example, if you are dealing with a weather emergency, or if you are dealing with something like almost like a mathematical equation type problem or a scientific type problem, as opposed to something that is actively trying to outthink you, and now you are trying to, kind of get in the head of that human element that is driving the problem. I think incident command tends to work better with that kind of with those kind of problems. Paul, John, Mike, anybody have any thoughts on that?
No, I like what you said, Dean, and I think you bring up a good point. It's different when there's a human element to it, because just as we learn, so do the bad guys, and so we're constantly having to readjust the way we do things as well. So I 100%.
John?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do tip my hat to the red team because they are much better at it. One of the problems, and Mike, I'm sure you've been in this situation, is trying to figure out when, as a responder or someone who's going to run an incident command system, to sort of switch gears. And when do you do that? Obviously in a hot zone, and when you're looking for an active shooter, that's not necessarily at the time. But when you have enough personnel coming on board, when do you finally take a step back and say, okay, we have to have somebody manage our resources? But that might be a story for another time. They may bore your listeners there, but it's definitely something you have to think about.
You see me smiling, right?
Yeah.
Because that is something that John and I, we've talked about quite a bit, is when you work in a medium-sized agency and you might be the first line supervisor and the incident commander, and you might also be the first on scene. When do you switch from one hat to another? And it's difficult to do that. That's why you have to have people around you that can maybe tap you on the shoulder and snap you into whatever role you need to be in at the time. It's critical to have people that have that around you that you trust, and they have that kind of trust in you that they could have that conversation with you. And it's not going to be taken personal. If someone says, hey, listen, you are of this rank, and I can do CPR, or I can do first aid. I need you to do what you do at your level. All right, Paul, any thoughts on that?
Right. I'm not a responder like you guys, but I did use the incident command system in managing my daughter's wedding. So there you go.
That can get tense.
I thought I heard screams in the background. It must be your wallet that's screaming from the expense of that thing.
Oh dear.
So as we move on from there, and believe it or not, gentlemen, we're down under 15 minutes. 45 minutes has flown by with this conversation. I just wanted to talk really quick about what can be done as far as laws and what type of things we should be implementing. For example, there's a lot of talk about more extensive background checks. There's a lot of talk about reducing the type of weapons that are available to everybody, law-abiding citizens in particular. So, John, what are some of the things that you feel can be done legally in order to kind of restrict people, if anything?
So if people are listening across the country, they may not like this, but I do like the model that we have in Massachusetts for background checks. And if people have mental health issues, you can strip firearms licensing and things like that. But it's not a matter of just taking a gun and banning it. It's such a ridiculous thought. It's got to have like a three-pronged attack to this, because you have to deal with the mental health component and what's motivating people behind these massacres. In our state, there's just no mental health help. So if we identify some dangerous people, yeah, we can take their gun license away. I'm pretty sure enough gun crime happens without needing a license. And the other thing is, we need to start actually putting people in jail. It is the biggest misnomer around that, our jails are overcrowding right now. Nobody goes to jail. So if you have a gun crime, you can have all these gun laws you want. You restrict you can't carry. Like I remember after the shooting in Las Vegas, our Massachusetts legislators got together and banned bump stocks. Mere possession of something that doesn't do anything, and they have to attach it to a firearm, is a 20-year felony. Nobody's going to go away for 20 years for that. And that's the problem. We need common sense gun laws, excellent mental health care with long-term solutions, and actual accountability.
All right. So those are your three prongs. All right, Mike, go ahead. Jump in on this.
Man, I like a lot of what John said. I think he makes a lot of great points, and it's such a difficult topic because it's so complex, and it all boils down to money. But I think that I think that there definitely needs to be, we should be doing a better job with mental health and regulating on a national level, because you shouldn't be able to slide over to the border, a border state, and grab a firearm and grab it and bring it back. So there are a lot of things, but something that I'll say to mental health is this: I don't even know if mental health is that's part of the problem, but I don't know that that's it, because a lot of the folks that have engaged in mass shootings, they haven't even triggered. They don't have a history of mental health. So we have to do more than just look at the mental health component. But I will say that that's part of it. But I also think that we have to get stricter about how we're regulating folks getting licenses, particularly here in Massachusetts. We could do a lot better with that. But John, you brought up a lot of good points that I think I would agree with you on.
So I'm going to go to Paul next. I just want to bring up 2 quick points. First of all, I don't know if there's any more overworked group of people than the mental health providers. It just seems like there's so few of them, and it seems like the mental health issues, if you're including drug and alcohol and any kind of substance abuse, because to me, that's also a mental health component. If you throw that in there, it's just off the charts, the amount of folks that need that kind of help.
Absolutely.
And the second thing from there, if I could devil's advocate a little bit, was is it the licensed gun owners that are the issue here all the time, or are these guns available, just as available, even more so to people that have criminal design? Paul, if you have any insight on this, please jump in.
Well, first of all, I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I just want to be clear about that. It's everybody wants to take a political opinion, and I'm glad that nobody here is taking major political opinions. I think, even we back in the day when we were growing up, we looked at politicians with some degree of reverence. That's all gone. I mean, everybody understands they're terribly flawed and probably corrupt. And I'm sorry to even say that or burst bubbles for people who think otherwise. But in the end, people are people. And what we've lost at some point and in many different ways is common decency, kindness. And I'm not going to go down that level, but down that road. But my daughter is a social worker. My daughter-in-law has also went to school for social work. And the generation coming up, I see as being more empathetic and more knowledgeable. And I'm not throwing all of the pressure on them, but I sure am hoping that voice of the generation coming up now is really going to speak into issues in ways that maybe we did not do a good job with.
Paul, you hit the nail on the head. And if I could speak to that a little bit.
Please do.
When it comes to mental health help in police officers, we're not great at seeking it out. But I will say, and Mike, I don't know if you're seeing this on your end, but I will say in talks that I've had with some of our younger officers, they are far more open, not only to seeking it, but encouraging it and talking about it. So I think it's absolutely phenomenal that, and it's just another nod to our young people on the job. But I think the future is going to get a little bit better because people are so much more open to mental health help if they want it.
All right. Paul, did you have something else? It looked like you were fixing your mouth to say something else.
No,
we're just agreeing.
Yeah, we're standing in agreement.
All right. So really quick. So we talked about that component. We talked about the gun control component a little bit. We kind of went down the mental health component, and we've talked about the environmental design component. Where do you think we need to be in order to have these kind of conversations? Because I don't know about you folks. So we've sat here, 4 different people, 4 different backgrounds, different trainings, different family dynamics, and we were able to have a conversation without yelling, screaming, and to Paul's point, making it political. How can we have people sit down at the table and have conversations just like this one here, so everybody can feel heard and people can kind of have their opinions heard?
Do you mind if I take that one first, Dean?
Oh, jump it. You're so excited. Please.
Yes, I am excited. And again, thank you for doing this whole show tonight. But I want to say that it's a silver lining of the pandemic that we got a lot more of a collaborative approach to things. And I know this incident aside and the Buffalo incident aside, but in schools, you know, the nurse used to be a forgotten component. And all of a sudden, the medical part is something where we need to hear that voice. The security component used to be a necessary evil. And I worked with the district where the security director reported to the IT director, who reported to an assistant superintendent, who reported to the superintendent. That's too far down the line. And we have to get away from this kind of leadership and flatten it so that we've got voices that are being heard and stature. And if there's ever a time where the security component should be a not just a necessary evil, but an important component, it's now. And if there was ever a time where people are listening, it's now. Education should be happening now.
I love that. Mike, John, who wants in?
How do I talk behind that? That was awesome.
It's like you rehearsed it, Paul.
You have that written down somewhere. No, I think Paul did an awesome. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that, but he did an awesome job. Instead of this, it needs to be more of this. And I think that you know, and I think it starts at the top of every culture, whether that's the police department, the medical medical professionals, what have you, security professionals. It has to. I think we all have to reach out to each other and figure out what we all can be doing to have a piece in that conversation to make the place a better, to make the world a better place. And I think that again, I think it has to start at the top, but it has to be less of this and more of this. But I can't even talk behind Paul because he wrote that down, and I'm that's all I got.
So, nice. Mike, well said. John, I'm going to give you the final word. Can you do it in about 45 seconds or so?
Yeah, this was an unbelievable conversation, and you know, like Paul said, if we can have this, the four of us in different parts of the state and the country, frankly, we can have it in our own communities. And you know, if I'm looking at my own leadership here, you know, I should even be taking the time out and talking to patrol officers and getting a sense of what, you know, they see should be done when they're responding to the schools for certain things. And you know, if I'm in meetings, I'll bring that there too. But I'd love to have them sit next to me.
I love that. And John, we've done things like that in the past when we worked together, where we would have the shift come in, and remember, we'd have the square, and we'd remove rank as best we could from the conversation, and everybody would have an equal say. Do you remember us doing that a few times?
Much so.
And I think that needs to be the norm in organizations, where people need to put aside the ego and the rank, because you might have somebody that's been on the job for a day that has a phenomenal idea. You know, just because someone's been there for 30 years, as we all know and we've all seen, sometimes they don't always have the best ideas. Sometimes they're full of knowledge, but sometimes that maybe they're a little bit concrete in their thought processes. So sometimes some fresh perspectives is what it's called for. So really quick, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Charlie's comment here. So Charlie has a great idea. Charlie says, make clinicians and social workers a city department, just like police, fire, and DPW. All right, that's definitely an episode.
That's another show.
That is another show. And Charlie, you know, thank you for that. That's a very thoughtful comment, and I think that's something that should be explored. So we've got about 90 seconds left. So I'm going to go to Paul first. Paul, in about 20 seconds, 30 seconds, talk about what you have cooking. How can people follow you? How can people contact you?
Yeah, thank you very much. I wrote a book called School Security that was published in 2015, and the second edition just came out last year. So all it's called is School Security, because that's what it's about. And I'm not here to sell that book, but it could be helpful to people. The other thing that could be helpful is schoolsafety.gov. That's the national repository for school security and emergency planning resources.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time out to jump on. Mike, final parting shots for you.
No, Dean, I want to thank you again for having me on the show. I got a chance to meet Paul and John, and hopefully, you know, one day the world will bring us together and we can actually meet in person. But until that time, fantastic conversation with you, gentlemen, and I look forward to speaking with you some more.
All right, John Bonney, give it to us.
You already gave him the wrap up, but I agree. It was nice to be here, and I think the world of all three gentlemen, and I appreciate everything you do.
All right, folks, believe it or not, we're up on time. If you like the conversation, again, please subscribe to Supply the Why on all your favorite media channels, social media channels, all your favorite podcast platforms. We're back. We're going to be having more live conversations, great conversations just like this. So from everybody here on the panel tonight, again, thank you so much for taking the time out to watch us. And as always, #Supply the Why. Good night, everybody.
Supply the Why.